Welcome to Nocturnal Tales. Tonight's mystery is The Bullet in the Bookstall. Paris is dressed for culture. Bright halls, polite applause, the comforting rustle of paper and ink. But beneath the civility, something is waiting. And when it arrives, the entire room becomes a trap. Every glance counts, every movement matters, and the truth hides in plain sight. As always, this is an original Nocturnal Tales story, written in the spirit and style of the great Golden Age mysteries, but entirely our own creation. And if you'd like more stories, you can find our full back catalogue on Patreon and Spotify, with extra new stories there as well. The links are in the description. Now then, listen closely, keep your conclusions in check, and do not trust the obvious too soon. Let us begin. Chapter 1. The Hall of Polite Applause. It is easy in England to imagine that politics is conducted by speeches and whiskers and the slow turning of committees. In France, I have learned, politics is conducted by nerves. On the morning of the tragedy, Paris wore one of those brisk, well-scrubbed faces it puts on when it means to be respectable. The boulevards were bright, the newspapers cried their usual catastrophes, and the city behaved, outwardly, like a lady who has decided that whatever scandal is approaching, it will at least arrive to a clean drawing-room. Monsieur Hercule Poirot and I were not in Paris for any lofty purpose at all. We had come, by Poirot's own insistence, because the stomach of France, by which he meant her kitchens, was, in his opinion, a restorative more reliable than any seaside air. He had also, with that curious, modest vanity of his, declared that he wished to see a certain exhibition at the Salle Wagram, an event devoted to books, publishers, and the civic display of culture. "A book fair, Hastings," he had said, adjusting his tie with that worship of symmetry which borders on religion. "It is like a market, but without the smell of onions. Also, the people pretend they come for ideas, when in truth they come for appearances. That is very instructive." I confess I was not wholly charmed by the prospect. A hall full of earnest men discussing bindings did not strike me as the ideal diversion. But Poirot can make even a timetable sound like theatre, and besides, there are worse fates than being led about Paris by a man who knows precisely where the best coffee hides. We arrived shortly before noon. The entrance was guarded not by soldiers, but by the subtle seriousness of policemen in plain clothes, men with the watchful eyes and unnatural stillness that always betrays the professional. Inside, the atmosphere was at once festive and constrained. Banners, flowers, and neat rows of stands, the smell of paper and ink, the murmur of voices that attempted gaiety while keeping one ear trained for importance. It was not the books that mattered. It was the guest. At the center of the hall, there had been erected a small platform. Chairs were arranged with military exactness. On either side, a shallow corridor had been left clear, and along this corridor men stood who looked as if they might at any moment become a wall. "The President is to attend," I said, reading a printed program that had been placed into my hand. Poirot did not take it. He was studying the room, and more particularly, the people in it. "Yes," he murmured. "The Republic arrives, and everyone tries to look as if they had been waiting for her all their lives." A ripple passed through the hall. It began at the doors and ran along the crowd like wind across wheat. Heads turned, smiles appeared with sudden, practiced ease. A few women adjusted their hats. Men straightened their shoulders. The photographers, already prowling like hungry cats, lifted their machines. Then the President entered. He was an older man, of that type which seems carved from duty. Grave mouth, controlled expression, the eyes of a person who has read too many reports of human folly. He moved with the measured confidence of a man accustomed to rooms falling silent for him, and yet there was a certain heaviness, too, as if he carried not merely his office, but the knowledge of what that office cost. He approached the platform to polite applause, and the applause had that curious quality of being both sincere and nervous. It is difficult to clap with enthusiasm when you are also scanning the crowd. Poirot leaned slightly toward me. "Look at the hands," he said softly. "Not the faces. The faces lie from habit. The hands tell you the truth." I obeyed, somewhat puzzled. Hands held programs. Hands gripped handbags. Hands adjusted lapels. Here and there I saw the quick, unconscious flecks of fingers, anxiety, anticipation, excitement. It struck me, absurdly, that the whole hall was a collection of hands waiting to do something. A man near the front row, tall, pale, sharply dressed, did not clap at all. He stood with his arms at his sides, perfectly still, his gaze fixed not on the president, but on the corridor beside the platform. His stillness had the quality of an act. He was not calm. He was controlling himself. Poirot's eyes flickered to him for the briefest moment, then away again. But I knew that flicker. "It is nothing," Poirot murmured almost lazily. "Perhaps, but I do not like men who are too well behaved." The president began to speak. His voice was not theatrical. It had the quiet authority of a man who expects to be listened to, and is usually correct. He spoke of letters, of civic virtue, of culture as a defense against barbarism. The audience nodded at the appropriate moments and smiled when a light joke was offered, as one smiles when a dignitary gives permission for amusement. To my left stood a small, compact gentleman with a moustache so carefully groomed it looked like a separate creature. He was murmuring something about the acoustics. Poirot, however, had stopped listening to the speech. His attention was on the side aisle, on the flow of bodies near the bookstalls, where latecomers drifted in, and the indifferent wandered as if the president were merely another author to be skimmed. A young man in a dark coat pushed forward with the impatience of youth and was checked gently but firmly by one of the plainclothes men. The young man laughed, apologized, and retreated. Behind him, a woman in a severe hat whispered something sharply to her companion. Two men, both with the lean, hungry look of foreign journalists, glanced at each other, exchanged a small nod, and began edging closer. Poirot's voice, when it came, was little more than breath. "There is too much movement, Hastings." "Movement? It's a crowd." "A crowd can be still," he corrected. "This is arranged. You see, people who are not here for books, people who are here for the moment." I began to feel the discomfort that precedes something terrible. It is like the tightening of a collar. Nothing has happened, and yet the body knows. The president finished a sentence. A burst of applause rose, again that polite, half-anxious clapping, and in that instant of noise, a man stepped out from the right-hand side, as neatly as if he had been cued. It happened with a dreadful simplicity. No shouted warning, no dramatic leap. Just the clean, abrupt gesture of an arm lifting. A sound. Not even the grand crack one expects from novels, but a hard, flat report that seemed to punch the air rather than tear it. Then another. The president's head jerked. For a fraction of a second he remained upright, as if refusing to acknowledge what had been done to him. Then he folded awkwardly, like a marionette whose strings have been cut. A woman screamed. Chairs scraped. The applause died into a roar of panic. Poirot moved, quickly, astonishingly quickly for a man of his build. He did not run toward the president. He ran toward the shooter. I confess with shame that I stood frozen for a heartbeat, my mind insisting that this could not be real. Then, training, old army reflex, took over, and I pushed forward. Men were surging. The plainclothes police were already on the shooter, but the crowd made it chaos. Arms, shoulders, hats knocked askew, bodies trying to flee and bodies trying to see. I caught a glimpse of the man who had fired. He was young, clean-shaven, his eyes wide and shining with a kind of terrible purpose. He did not look like a common thug. He looked, oddly, like a student. One of the policemen struck his wrist. The pistol clattered to the floor. And then, as if the drama required an additional twist, another voice rang out, sharp, furious, not French at all, but heavily accented. "Don't kill him. Don't you dare kill him." It came from a man at the edge of the melee, tall, pale, sharply dressed. The same man who had not clapped. He was trying to push forward, his face contorted with something that was not fear, but rage. Poirot heard him too. His head turned and his eyes narrowed. The shooter was pinned now, face to the boards, wrists wrenched behind him. He shouted something incoherent, words that sounded like French, but broken, battered, as if forced through a mouth not built for it. I reached Poirot's side at last. "Poirot, the President—" Poirot did not look at the fallen man on the platform. He looked at the pistol on the floor, and then at the shooter's hands, and then at the tall, pale man shouting at the police. "There," Poirot said softly. "There is the second story." "What do you mean?" Poirot bent, very carefully, and with 2 fingers lifted something small from the floor beside the pistol. A scrap of paper folded tight. He held it up to the light for an instant, then tucked it away as neatly as if he had found a lost button. Around us, the hall had become a nightmare of respectable people discovering that violence does not care for manners. Somewhere, a woman was crying hysterically. Someone shouted for a doctor. The police were yelling orders. Photographers, God help them, were already snapping. Poirot's voice remained calm. "Come, Hastings," he said. "Do not look only where everyone looks. Look where no one wants to look." He nodded toward the tall, pale man, now restrained by a policeman, still shouting, his composure broken at last. "He knows him," Poirot said, "or he knows the idea of him." The implication struck me cold. "You think there's more than one man involved?" Poirot's eyes, sharp as needles, held mine. "In politics," he said, "there is always more than one man involved." At that moment, a stout official in an immaculate suit, white-faced, sweating, pushed through to the police, waving his hands as if he could command reality back into place. "This is an outrage, he cried. "You will secure the hall at once. No one leaves. No one speaks to the press." Poirot watched him with interest, as if he were studying a character introduced in Act 1. And in the distance, beyond the platform, I saw a door that had been propped open, perhaps for staff, perhaps for delivery, and through it a shadow slipped away with the unhurried ease of someone who knew the panic would provide perfect cover. I opened my mouth to shout. Poirot caught my sleeve, not roughly, but with absolute control. "No," he said. "Not yet. If you shout, you scare the fish back into the deep water." He released me, smoothed his cuffs, absurdly, meticulously, and stepped toward the nearest policeman with the confidence of a man who expects to be obeyed. "Inspector," he said in French that was as precise as his moustache, "you will permit that I assist. I am Hercule Poirot." The inspector stared, then, to my astonishment, recognition flashed across his face. Paris, it seemed, remembered its celebrities. "Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot inclined his head, polite as ever, as if bodies were not lying in blood a few yards away. "There is a murdered president," Poirot said gently. "And already someone is arranging what the world will believe about it." He glanced once more toward that open door, now empty. "And I," he added, "do not like arrangements." Chapter 2. The Man Who Would Not Applaud. If there is one thing Paris does well, it is to turn chaos into procedure with astonishing speed. Within minutes, the doors of the Salle of Wagram were shut and guarded. A cordon of police formed itself as if it had been rehearsed. The injured were lifted and carried with a grim, efficient tenderness. The crowd, only a moment ago a sea of hats and cultured smiles, became a restless herd pressed into corners, each person trying to look innocent by looking important. On the platform, the president lay behind a screen hastily erected from banners and coats. Someone had placed flowers on the boards with a kind of desperate politeness, as though lilies might persuade bullets to have been a misunderstanding. Poirot had already adopted the air he wears when he is about to be irritatingly useful. Calm, courteous, and entirely unafraid of uniforms. "Inspector," he said again to the man who had approached him, tall, dark, with the worn eyes of someone who has learned not to be surprised, "you will do me the honor to tell me what you know." The inspector's gaze flicked to me, then back to Poirot. "You are Hercule Poirot," he said, not quite as a question. Poirot inclined his head. "And you are—" "Le Duc, Brigade Criminelle." He swallowed, glanced toward the screened platform, and his jaw tightened. "The president has been shot. We have a suspect in custody. The hall is sealed. Witnesses will be questioned." "All very good," Poirot said, "but the truth is not a list. It is a shape." Le Duc's mouth twitched as if he wanted to refuse, but the moment would not permit pride. There are occasions when even the French police accept assistance, provided it comes wrapped in a famous name. "Our man," Le Duc said, lowering his voice, "stepped forward during the speech. 2 shots. He was seized immediately. Weapon recovered." Poirot's eyes went, as they always do, to the small details. "The weapon, was it his?" Le Duc hesitated. "It was in his hand." Poirot's expression did not change, but I felt the question land like a pin. "In his hand," Poirot repeated. "Yes, that is not always the same thing." Before the inspector could answer, a commotion rose from the cordoned area where the shooter was held. The crowd strained, hungry despite itself. 2 policemen hauled a young man forward, thin, pale, with hair that fell into his eyes in a way that suggested either fashion or neglect. His coat was good, but worn at the cuffs. His face had the strained intensity of a man who has lived for an idea so long that he no longer remembers ordinary life. He looked neither drunk nor mad. That, in a way, was the most frightening thing about him. The tall, sharply dressed man I had noticed earlier was being restrained a few yards away. He fought the policeman not with fists, but with furious insistence, as if he believed he had a right to be at the center of the scene. "Let me speak to him," he snapped. "He's a fool, do you hear me? A fool." The young man in custody turned his head at the sound, and for a heartbeat his eyes met the others. There was recognition. Not warmth, not friendship. Recognition like a blade. Poirot saw it too. "Ah," he murmured, "now we begin." He stepped slightly closer to Le Duc. "That one," Poirot said softly, nodding toward the well-dressed man. "He is not a stranger." Le Duc frowned. "We have not identified him yet. He was near the front. He made a disturbance after the arrest." Poirot's voice remained mild. "Near the front, yes, but not applauding, not listening, watching a corridor. And when your men seized the shooter, he shouted, 'Do not kill him,' not with compassion, Hastings, but with possessiveness." I confess the word struck me unpleasantly. Possessiveness? Yes. Like a man who does not wish his property to be damaged before he has finished with it. Le Duc looked at Poirot hard. "You think he is involved?" "I think he is tied," Poirot corrected. "In what way, we will discover." At that moment, a short, nervous official in a creased suit bustled up, accompanied by 2 men who smelled of ministries and long corridors. His face was damp with anxiety. His eyes kept darting toward the doors as though he feared Paris itself might run away. "Monsieur l'inspecteur," he began, then saw Poirot and faltered. "Who is this?" Leduc's shoulders stiffened. "This is Monsieur Hercule Poirot." The official blinked, recalculated, and decided wisely that famous detectives were less dangerous than scandal. "Monsieur Poirot," he said with forced politeness, "I am Vautrin, cabinet du ministre. There are sensitivities." Poirot beamed at him with an innocence that never fails to alarm me. "Of course there are sensitivities," he said. "There is also a murdered president." Vautrin flushed. "We must control information. The press will invent if we do not provide something. There are foreign considerations." Poirot's smile did not move. "Yes, and that is why someone will be very eager to make this crime simple." Vautrin blinked. "Simple?" "A lone fanatic," Poirot said pleasantly. "A madman with a pistol. A story that ends neatly before it begins to smell." Leduc watched the two men with that particular expression policemen have when politicians enter the room, a mixture of resentment and necessity. Vautrin drew himself up. "It may be exactly that." Poirot tilted his head. "And it may not." The official's eyes hardened. "Monsieur Poirot, with respect, France will not be lectured in a public hall while—" Poirot interrupted him with a gentleness that somehow cut more sharply than any raised voice. "Monsieur Vautrin, I do not lecture France. I observe people, and I assure you, someone in this hall is already thinking not of the dead man, but of the headline." Vautrin's mouth opened, closed. He looked past Poirot toward the cordoned area where the shooter stood between policemen like a student awaiting punishment. "Question him," Vautrin said curtly to Leduc. "Now, and keep it brief. Names, affiliations, motive. We need something we can say." Poirot's eyes flickered to me for an instant, and I knew he had taken the measure of the man. "Inspector," Poirot said to Leduc, "you will allow me to be present." Leduc hesitated, then nodded, as though surrendering to the inevitable. They brought the young man to a small side room near the bookstalls, an office used, I imagine, for accounting and petty disputes between publishers. Now it contained a table, 3 chairs, and the smell of cheap ink. The suspect sat with his hands on the table. There was dried blood on one knuckle, perhaps from the struggle, perhaps from earlier. His gaze was fixed somewhere beyond us, as if he still stood in the hall hearing applause. Leduc opened a notebook. "Name." The young man's lips moved. Then, in careful French, "Paul Giraud." I saw Leduc's pen pause very slightly at the surname, as if he expected something else. "Age." 26. "Profession." A faint smile, tight, bitter. "Reader." Leduc's eyes narrowed. "Your work." "I translate. I write when there is paper. I sell words to men who sell speeches." Poirot sat down opposite him without asking permission, arranged his cuffs, and looked at him as one might look at a chess piece that has moved in a surprising way. "Monsieur Giraud," Poirot said gently, "you shot the president." Giraud's eyes came sharply to Poirot's face. "Yes." No theatrics, no denial, no bravado, just the plain statement, as if he were acknowledging he had taken a tram. "Why?" Leduc demanded. Giraud's jaw tightened. "Because he is the face of a system that—" Poirot raised a hand, almost apologetically. "Non, non, not the speech." Poirot's tone was patient. "You did not risk your life for a paragraph. You risked it for something that felt immediate, personal. Tell me, why today? Why here?" Giraud stared. For the first time, a crack showed. "I chose the moment," he said, but the words were less certain. Poirot leaned forward a fraction. His voice softened further. Someone helped you choose it. Giraud's eyes flashed. No. Poirot nodded, as if he had expected that answer precisely. Very well. Then you chose the hall. You chose the corridor. You chose to step forward exactly when the applause would cover the sound of your first shot. You chose a weapon that would not misfire in a nervous hand. You chose to be seized quickly, before you could be shot yourself. Giraud's fingers flexed on the table. Poirot continued, still mild. And yet, in the chaos, someone shouted, "Do not kill him." Giraud's gaze flickered, an involuntary movement. Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Ah," he said softly. "So." Leduc's pen stopped. "You know him." Giraud swallowed. "I know of him." "His name?" Leduc snapped. Giraud hesitated, then spoke like a man choosing between dangers. "Dmitri Sokolov." I felt Leduc stiffen. The name meant something to him, if not personally, then professionally. Poirot glanced at me, and in that look there was an entire lecture. "You see, Hastings? The lone fanatic already has a second man attached." Poirot turned back to Giraud. "What is Sokolov to you?" Giraud's mouth tightened. "A man who talks." "A man who plans?" Poirot suggested. Giraud's eyes flared. "No, he does not control me." Poirot nodded again, as if accepting a child's protest. "Of course not. He merely, how do you say, encouraged." Before Giraud could answer, the door opened, and a policeman spoke rapidly to Leduc. Leduc's face changed. "They're identifying Sokolov now," he said. "The man who caused the disturbance. Foreign national. Papers questionable." Poirot rose at once. "Excellent," he said. "Take me to him." They led us back out into the hall. The noise had settled into a low, constant rumble, murmured conversations, the occasional outburst quickly suppressed, the clicking of cameras in defiance of orders. Sokolov stood near a column, hands held by two policemen, his hair perfectly combed despite the struggle. He looked like a man accustomed to salons, not holding cells. His suit was immaculate. His eyes were cold and bright with contempt. When he saw Poirot, his expression shifted, very slightly, into something like calculation. Poirot approached him as if they had met at a dinner party. "Monsieur Sokolov," Poirot said pleasantly, "you were very concerned that they should not kill the shooter." Sokolov's lip curled. "I dislike incompetence," he said. "If you shoot a man, you shoot him properly. You do not flail like a boy." Poirot nodded, as if discussing etiquette. "And yet you were not applauding the president." Sokolov's eyes hardened. "I do not applaud politicians." Poirot's gaze, sharp as a needle, held him. "No," Poirot said. "You were not applauding because you were watching to see if your investment succeeded." Sokolov laughed once, abruptly. "You are dramatic, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot smiled. "I am precise." Then, in a tone so light it might have been mistaken for small talk, Poirot said, "You did not expect the president to fall where he fell." For the first time, Sokolov's composure faltered. Not in his face, but in the briefest tightening around the eyes. Poirot saw it and did not let go. "Ah," Poirot murmured. "So the plan had an elegance. But reality, as always, has bad manners." Sokolov's voice sharpened. "I want my lawyer." "Later," Leduc snapped. Sokolov turned his head, and his gaze slid past Poirot to the far side of the hall, to that service door I had seen open earlier. It was closed now, guarded. But the look was not relief. It was annoyance. Poirot followed his gaze and then very gently returned his attention to Sokolov. "You are looking for someone," Poirot said. Sokolov's smile returned, thin and unpleasant. "I am looking for fresh air. This place smells like panic." Poirot stepped closer, and though he did not raise his voice, the effect was of a knife laid neatly on a table. "Monsieur Sokolov," Poirot said, "a president is dead. A young man will be blamed. You will be very tempted to let that be the end of it." Sokolov's eyes glittered. "And if it is the end?" Poirot's smile vanished entirely. "Then," he said softly, "you have arranged the story well." A shout rose from the entrance, another officer pushing through, urgent, breathless. "Inspector, we found something, outside in the alley by the delivery gate, a man's coat and blood." Poirot did not react as a surprised man reacts. He reacted as a man who has just been proven right. "There," he said quietly to me, "the third story." And as the police hurried toward the delivery gate, I understood with a sick certainty what Poirot had meant from the beginning. The shots were only the beginning. The arrangement had already moved on. Dear listeners, thank you for your loyalty and for spending time with this story. If you're listening on YouTube, quick heads up, you're missing out. Right now, YouTube gets one new story a week. But on Patreon, listeners get 3 brand new stories every week, and there's already a whole stack of episodes you haven't heard yet. You also get access to our full back catalog. In fact, we've removed over 100 stories from YouTube, so there's a lot you won't find on the channel anymore. And if Patreon isn't an option, join us on Spotify. You'll get 2 new stories a week, plus our entire back catalog, the same library as Patreon. It's the easiest way to catch up on everything. If you'd like to support the show in a simpler way, you can also back us with a one-off tip on Buy Me a Coffee or PayPal. This podcast is now fully supported by listeners on Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, and PayPal, so if the support isn't there, the show may have to stop, even though we really don't want that. All links are in the description. Now, let's get back to our story, shall we? Chapter 3. The Coat by the Delivery Gate. The alley behind the Salle Wagram was one of those Parisian service passages the city pretends do not exist. Narrow, damp, practical, and designed for crates rather than consciences. The delivery gate stood half open now, guarded by 2 policemen who looked irritated at being dragged away from the more glamorous part of the catastrophe. On the ground lay a dark overcoat, folded as if someone had dropped it neatly on purpose. A small pool of blood had dried beside it in a shapeless stain. Leduc crouched, touched the cloth with his pencil and grimaced. "Recent," he said. "Not hours old." Poirot did not touch the coat. He rarely does, when everyone else is eager to paw at evidence like children with a new toy. He stood with his hands behind his back, studying the scene as though it were a stage set that had been altered between acts. "The blood is here," he said softly. "But where is the body?" One of the officers shifted. "Could have slipped away." Poirot's eyes were sharp. "With a wound that leaves this?" "Perhaps. But then he does not fold his coat. He runs." Leduc looked at the gate, then at the alley mouth beyond. "There's a back street," he said. "A man could vanish in minutes in this city." Poirot's gaze dropped to the coat again. "Unless he did not wish to vanish," Poirot said. "Unless he wished to be misplaced." A constable approached, holding something in a handkerchief. "Found in the pocket, Inspector." Leduc unfolded the cloth. Inside was a pair of thin leather gloves and, more interesting, a cheap Bookstall program, the same sort we had been given at the entrance. On it, a name had been scribbled in pencil, clumsy and hurried. Salle Wagram, 12h15, corridor droit. Poirot's expression did not change, but I felt the air tighten. A rendezvous, I said. Or an instruction, Poirot corrected. And the handwriting is not the handwriting of a man who enjoys writing. Le Duc frowned. The shooter? Poirot shook his head. No. Giraud writes with spite and education. This writes with impatience. Different man. He nodded toward the blood. And yet he bleeds. Le Duc's jaw clenched. So we have a third person. One shoots, one shouts, and one bleeds in an alley. Poirot gave a small, almost sympathetic movement of his shoulders. In politics, Inspector, there is always the man you see, and the man who profits, and the man who is paid. Le Duc's eyes narrowed. Which one is bleeding? Poirot's gaze stayed on the gate, on the angle of the coat, on the small, stupid details that so often contain the whole truth. The one who carried something, Poirot said, and was punished for carrying it poorly. I confess that, at that moment, I felt a wave of cold disgust. A man lay dying, or already dead, in some corner of Paris, and here we were discussing him like a dropped parcel. Behind us, the hall roared faintly with contained panic. In front of us, the alley held the quiet of guilt. Le Duc straightened. We need identities. We need a chain. Then we must stop looking at famous men, Poirot said, and begin to look at the humble ones, the ones who open doors. He turned and pointed, quite calmly, at the delivery gate and the small booth beside it. Who controls this gate? A policeman blinked. The hall caretaker and the delivery porter. Bring them, Poirot said. Within minutes, a short, thick-necked caretaker arrived, cap in hand, sweating with fear and indignation. With him came a porter, a young fellow with ink-stained fingers and the nervous look of someone who has spent his life being blamed for other people's decisions. Le Duc began sharply. Who went out this gate before the shooting? The caretaker sputtered. No one. We had orders. Poirot interrupted gently. Monsieur, you have had many orders today. Some from policemen, some from officials, perhaps some from men with good suits. It is difficult to obey them all. So tell me only this. Who came to you with a request that sounded reasonable? The caretaker stared at Poirot, offended by the politeness more than the accusation. A man, he said grudgingly. He had a badge, looked official. He said there was to be a delivery of documents for the platform. He spoke like those ministry types. A badge? Le Duc snapped. Describe him. The caretaker hesitated, searching his memory like a man searching his pockets. Average height, hat, grey moustache, small one. Very neat. He said the documents were to be brought in through the service corridor, not the front, to avoid attention. Poirot's eyes flicked to mine. A small moustache. Very neat. Not Poirot's kind of moustache, too small, too practical, but still, a deliberate detail. And did you let him in? Poirot asked. Of course I did, the caretaker burst out. He had the badge, and he knew the timing. He said, it must be before the applause. Poirot's head tilted. Before the applause, he repeated softly. How theatrical. He turned to the porter. And you? Did you carry these documents? The porter swallowed. I carried a case. A leather case. To whom? To a man in the right corridor, the porter said quickly, eager to be useful. He was waiting near the column by the bookstall. Tall, foreign, good suit. Sokolov, I said. The porter nodded violently. Yes, that's him. He took the case like it was heavy. He didn't like to touch it long. Poirot's eyes narrowed. He did not like to touch it, Poirot murmured, because it was not meant for his hands. Le Duc's voice was hard. What was in the case? The porter looked miserable. I didn't open it. But you noticed something, Poirot said gently. You noticed because you are an observant man, and now you are frightened, so you pretend you saw nothing. What did you notice? The porter's eyes darted to Leduc, then back to Poirot. There was a smell, he whispered, like oil, like metal. Leduc swore under his breath. Poirot did not. He simply said very quietly, "So, the weapon did not appear from nowhere. It arrived as a package, and someone used the applause not only to cover the sound of a shot, but to cover the movement of a plan." Leduc stared at him. "You're saying the pistol was supplied inside?" Poirot nodded once. "And the man with the badge?" Leduc demanded. "Find him." Poirot lifted a finger. Precise. "First, Inspector, do not assume the badge is real. Second, do not assume the moustache is real. Third, most important, do not assume he entered to deliver." Leduc frowned. "What else?" Poirot looked back at the coat on the ground. "He entered," Poirot said, "to leave." The implication landed. "A way out," I said. "A controlled way out," Poirot agreed. "A passage that bypasses the crowd. The sort of passage one uses if one must move something quietly." Leduc's face darkened. A second weapon. Poirot's gaze held the alley like a line of writing he had not yet finished reading. "Or a second man," he said. At that moment an officer hurried up from the alley mouth. "Inspector, we found him, behind the bins, further down, not dead." Leduc moved at once. I followed, with Poirot at my shoulder, his small steps quick and tidy. Behind a row of rubbish bins, half in shadow, lay a man on his side, one hand clamped to his abdomen. His face was pale, his lips flecked with spit. The blood was real enough. But what struck me, even before I saw the wound, was his expression. Not fear, not pain. A dull, furious disappointment, like a man who has been cheated. Poirot crouched beside him with the delicacy of a surgeon. "Monsieur," Poirot said softly, "you have been hurt." The man's eyes flicked up, and something like hatred passed through them. "I did my part," he rasped. Poirot's voice remained gentle. "For whom?" The man's breathing hitched. He tried to laugh, but it became a cough. Poirot leaned closer, and his tone changed, still quiet, but suddenly iron beneath velvet. "Monsieur," Poirot said, "a president is dead. You are bleeding in the rubbish like a dog. The men you served will not come back for you, so you may as well be useful, for yourself." The man's eyes rolled toward the hall behind us, where Paris still pretended it could contain the story. He whispered a name. Not Sokolov, not Giraud, a name I had not heard all day. Poirot's face remained still, but I saw, just once, his eyes sharpen as if a new piece had clicked into place. "What did he say?" Leduc demanded. Poirot rose slowly. "He said," Poirot replied, "the name of the man with the badge." He looked at Leduc. "And now, Inspector, you must decide something." Leduc's jaw tightened. "What?" Poirot's voice was low. "Do you want to solve the crime," he said, "or do you want to protect the story?" And in that moment I saw the true danger of the case. Not merely the bullet, but the machinery that would prefer it to be simple. Chapter 4. The Badge That Opened Doors. The wounded man's whisper should have been shouted. It carried more danger than any pistol report, because it was a name that could not be filed neatly under fanatic. Inspector Leduc motioned his men in close, and the alley became suddenly too small for the number of authorities now leaning over one poor, expendable creature. "Say it again," Leduc ordered. The man's mouth worked. His eyes were already glazing with that ugly film that comes when pain grows bored of pretending it is manageable. Poirot crouched again, close enough that the man could hear only him. Gently, Poirot murmured, "One more time, for me." The man swallowed and whispered into Poirot's ear. Poirot stood very slowly, as though he did not wish the name to spill into the air. Leduc's face was tight with impatience. "Well?" Poirot looked at him. "His name is Morel," Poirot said. "Jean Morel." Leduc's eyes narrowed. "I don't know him." "No," Poirot agreed, "but you will." He turned to the constable nearest the gate. "Bring the caretaker, bring the porter, and bring me, how do you call it, the register. The paper where deliveries are written down, even when men pretend they are not." The caretaker protested at once. He had never seen such interest in his petty bureaucracy. But it emerged, after much grumbling and a threat from Leduc, that there was indeed a ledger. A dog-eared notebook kept in the booth, mostly used for recording crates of pamphlets and the occasional theatre prop. It was the sort of thing nobody reads until it becomes evidence. Poirot flipped through it with maddening calm. "This morning," he said, "there is an entry." Leduc leaned in. I did as well. In cramped handwriting was written, 11h40, dossier, plateforme, Monsieur Morel, cabinet. Cabinet, Leduc repeated, as in ministry. Poirot nodded. And the caretaker said he looked like a ministry man. And he had a badge. Leduc's mouth tightened. Vautrin, our sweating official from the cabinet, had followed the commotion out to the alley. Now he pushed forward, face pinched with irritation at being pulled toward facts. "What is this?" he demanded. "Inspector, we cannot have—" Poirot turned, polite as ever. "Monsieur Vautrin," he said, "do you employ a man called Jean Morel?" Vautrin blinked once, then did the very thing Poirot had predicted earlier. He tried to make the question disappear by making his answer smooth. "There are many employees," he said. "Many names." Poirot's smile did not soften. "Of course. But this one signs the delivery book at 11:40 and uses the word cabinet like a passport." Vautrin's eyes flicked, just for a moment, to Leduc, as if silently begging the policeman to remove this nuisance of a detective. Leduc did not oblige. Poirot went on, still mild. "Perhaps he is not truly cabinet. Perhaps he is only convenient. But either way, the name exists now. And names, once spoken aloud, have a habit of refusing to die quietly." Vautrin's nostrils flared. "You are overreaching, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot inclined his head. "Possibly. Then it will be very easy for you to prove me wrong. You will telephone your office and ask, 'Do we have a Jean Morel?' And you will tell Inspector Leduc the answer." Vautrin hesitated, just long enough for me to see the calculation. If he called and there was no Morel, Poirot would look foolish. If he called and there was, the matter became dangerous. He chose a third path. "I will handle this," he said sharply. "Privately." Leduc's voice cut in like a blade. "Non," he said. "You will handle nothing privately while a president bleeds. You will answer." For a moment, the two men stared at each other, the civil servant who lived on influence and the policeman who lived on evidence. It was remarkable how quickly a murder can make old hierarchies wobble. Vautrin's jaw clenched. He turned away, barking to one of his attendants. "Telephone. Now." While he did so, Poirot's gaze drifted, quietly, almost lazily, back toward the hall. I followed it. And there, through the open gate, I could see the edge of the crowd, the photographers still prowling, and beyond them the column where Sokolov had stood. Sokolov was no longer there. I felt my stomach drop. "He's gone," I said under my breath. Poirot did not look surprised. "Of course," he murmured. A man who shouts, "Do not kill him," does not wish to be present for the questions. Leduc overheard and snapped orders immediately. Men ran. The gate area became a flurry of boots and shouted instructions. Poirot did not move. Instead, he looked at the wounded man again. "You will take him to a hospital," Poirot said to Leduc, "and you will post a guard. He is your thread. If you lose him, you will spend the rest of your career chasing shadows." Leduc nodded curtly, then gestured to two constables. As they lifted the man, his hand clawed weakly at Poirot's sleeve. Poirot bent. The man whispered, hoarse and desperate. "They promised," he rasped. "They promised I would be out, through the gate, before the noise." Poirot's voice was gentle, almost kind. "Yes. And then they changed their minds." The man's eyes burned with hatred. "It wasn't meant to be me," he hissed. "It was meant to be another." Poirot's head tilted. "Another man?" The wounded man swallowed hard. "The one with the case," he whispered. He said the case wasn't for Sokolov. Sokolov was only to pass it." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "To whom?" The man's mouth trembled. "I don't know," he whispered. "But I heard the name once, in the corridor. A nickname." Poirot leaned closer. "The nickname?" The man's lips formed it with effort. "Le libraire," he breathed. "The bookseller." They carried him away then, and the alley seemed colder for the absence of his miserable heat. "The bookseller?" I repeated. "But we're at a book exhibition. Half the hall could be called that." Poirot's gaze was distant, thoughtful. "Exactly," he said. "A nickname that hides inside the scenery." Vautrin returned, pale now in a different way. The man who had wanted control had just discovered the situation had teeth. "There is a Jean Morel," he admitted stiffly. "Attached to an intermediary office. He runs errands. He is not important." Poirot's expression remained polite, but his eyes were merciless. "He is important enough to sign his name in a delivery book and to open a service gate." Vautrin's voice rose. "You do not understand what you are suggesting. If there is an insinuation that someone connected to—" Poirot cut him off gently. "Monsieur Vautrin," he said, "I am not suggesting. I am observing." Leduc stepped closer. "Where is Morel now?" he demanded. Vautrin hesitated again, then grudgingly, "He did not report back after noon." Leduc swore. Poirot lifted a hand. "Inspector," he said, "do not chase him yet." Leduc stared at him. "What?" Poirot's voice was calm. "If Morel is alive, he is being used. If he is dead, he has already been used. Either way, he is not your prize." Leduc's eyes narrowed. "So what is?" Poirot looked back toward the hall, toward the rows of bookstalls and polite banners, and the perfect hiding places created by respectable culture. "The case," Poirot said simply. "Not the pistol. The case that carried it. Because a case is not thrown away like a weapon. A case is kept." He turned to me. "Hastings," he said, "you will do what you do best." I straightened, ready for something heroic. "You will look very English," Poirot said, "very harmless. You will walk among the bookstalls and listen." "Listen to what?" Poirot's eyes were bright. "To what people say when they believe the police are busy elsewhere," he replied. "In a hall of books, everyone believes they can whisper." "And you?" I asked. Poirot's smile was thin. "I," he said, "will find the bookseller." He adjusted his cuffs. absurdly neat in that dirty alley, and stepped back toward the hall as if he were merely returning to browse pamphlets. But I had the distinct feeling we had passed the point where this was a simple assassination. It had become, in Poirot's word, an arrangement. And arrangements, I was beginning to understand, always have more than one author. Chapter 5. The Stand with No Books. If you wish to observe human beings at their most revealing, do not watch them while they perform. Watch them while they believe they are merely waiting. The Salle Wagram, after the shooting, became a place of waiting. The police had sealed the doors, yet the hall still breathed with a restless, trapped life, publishers muttering about ruined schedules, dignitaries whispering into handkerchiefs, journalists sniffing like hounds kept too long from a trail. Every face wore the same expression of offended shock. Offended, I mean not only at the violence, but at the breach of etiquette. A president was one thing, a scene was another. Poirot had sent me among the bookstalls with a purpose so humiliatingly simple that I could not help but admire it. "You are English," he had said. "Therefore you are assumed to be innocent. Use this." I did my best. I looked bewildered, respectable, and mildly concerned for everyone's nerves. This, I have learned, is an expression the English can produce with very little effort. The bookstalls ran in neat lines. Their banners still hung. Their neat stacks still stood. But the whole enterprise now seemed grotesquely fragile. Paper and glue and polite ink in a world that had just remembered bullets. I drifted past one stand where a publisher, red-faced and indignant, was complaining loudly to anyone who would listen. "We have invested a fortune in this exhibition," he barked. "A fortune. And now it is a crime scene. You cannot expect commerce to—" A policeman glared at him, and the man lowered his voice without lowering his outrage. At another stand, a nervous young woman in spectacles clutched a stack of leaflets like a life raft. "They'll blame foreigners," she whispered to an older man. "They always do. It will be easy for them. A Russian, a student. It makes a clean story." The older man murmured something, and I moved on, pretending not to hear. The hall was thick with such statements, small, sharp opinions tossed like coins. Every person wanted the event to belong to their own private understanding of the world. It is one of our great comforts. When the unbearable happens, we rush to explain it, so that we may pretend it could not happen to us. I found myself near the right-hand corridor, corridor droite, as the scribbled note had put it. The column where Sokolov had stood was now guarded. A policeman leaned against it with the bored vigilance of a man who would like deeply to go home and eat something hot. I lingered nearby, leafing through a program I'd already read twice, and tried to listen without looking as if I were listening. Two men in dark coats, journalists I assumed, were speaking rapidly. "It was madness," one said. "A fanatic." "And yet he stepped forward as if he knew the rhythm," the other replied, "as if he knew precisely when the noise would rise. Someone told him, or someone used him." They broke off as a policeman looked their way. A moment later I heard another voice, older, dry, irritated. "You cannot keep us here indefinitely. I have a train." "Everyone has a train," the policeman replied without sympathy. The speaker was a man of about 50, with a thin moustache and the narrow, precise look of a bookkeeper. He wore a dark suit, plain but well cut, and carried a briefcase. He did not look like a publisher. He looked like someone who had come to collect paperwork. As he spoke, his eyes kept flicking, not toward the platform, not toward the police, but toward the line of stands near the back, where the service corridor ran behind them. I followed his gaze, and my attention caught on something that had seemed, until now, merely part of the scenery. A stand with no books. Its banner still hung above it, printed in modest lettering, Librairie du Pont-Neuf. But on the table below, There were only a few scattered catalogues and a vase of flowers that had begun to wilt. No stacks, no display, no eager seller trying to press a title into one's hands. The space looked abandoned. Not abandoned in panic, abandoned with intention. A man stood behind it, hands folded, expression neutral. He was of medium height, neatly groomed, with hair parted precisely. He might have been 40 or he might have been 60. He had the sort of face that makes itself forgettable by effort. His eyes moved over the hall with a calm that struck me as either admirable or unnatural. A bookseller, I thought, would not look calm in a hall where a president had just been shot. A bookseller would look frightened for his stock, his livelihood, his reputation. This man looked like he was waiting for a delayed appointment. I turned slightly, as though drifting with the crowd, and edged closer. I pretended to examine one of the catalogues on the table, lifting it, lowering it, like any bored visitor seeking distraction. The man behind the stand did not speak. His silence was not shy. It was controlled. After a moment I said in my most harmless tone, "Terrible business, isn't it?" He looked at me, and his eyes were very steady. "Terrible," he agreed without emotion. "You're with the Pont Neuf shop?" I asked, nodding at the banner. He did not glance up. He did not need to. He knew exactly what the banner said. "Yes," he replied. I picked up another catalogue. "You've not much on display," I said lightly. I should have thought this sort of exhibition would be the moment to show everything. For the first time, something like irritation flickered in his eyes, quick, suppressed. "Circumstances," he said. I smiled as though in sympathy. "Of course. Still, the police have been thorough. They've sealed everything. No one leaves." "Not yet," he said. And then, as if he had not meant to speak at all, he fell silent again. "Not yet." The words pricked at me. They suggested a timetable. Before I could decide how to press him, a policeman came past and barked at a cluster of men to move away from the corridor. The flow of bodies shifted, and I found myself nudged aside. When I looked back, the man was speaking to someone else, quietly, close. It was the thin-moustached bookkeeper type with the briefcase. The two stood with their heads inclined, as if discussing invoices. But the bookseller's hand, his right hand, moved in a small, quick gesture beneath the table. I saw it only because I was watching. He slipped something into the other man's briefcase. It was too small to be the leather case the porter had described, too quick, too discreet. A packet, perhaps. Papers. A small object wrapped in cloth. My heart began to thump in that old, ridiculous way it does when my instincts finally wake up after my intellect has been napping. I moved, pushing through the crowd, intending foolishly to get closer. But the moment I stepped forward, someone bumped my shoulder, hard enough to throw me off balance. "Pardon," said a voice in French, too smooth. I caught myself and looked up. It was Vautrin's attendant, one of those grey men who had hovered at the cabinet official's elbow like a shadow. He smiled at me with bright politeness, and eyes that were not smiling at all. "You are Captain Hastings, yes?" he said. I stiffened. "Yes." "Monsieur Vautrin asks if you are well. It is a difficult day." "It is," I said coldly. "I'm fine." The man nodded, as though satisfied with the answer, then stayed precisely where he was, blocking my path with the gentle firmness of a doorman. Over his shoulder, I saw the thin-moustached man close his briefcase. He and the bookseller exchanged the smallest nod. Then the thin-moustached man turned and began to walk, not toward the sealed front doors, but toward the back line of stands, where the service passage ran. The attendant kept smiling. "You should perhaps remain near the center," he said. "The police do not like people wandering." "I'll decide where I wander," I replied. His smile did not change. "Of course." I realized then, with a cold clarity, that I was not the only one following instructions. The bookseller looked up briefly, and his gaze met mine across the hall. There was no surprise in it, only a flat assessment, like a man checking whether a loose thread has been noticed. Then he turned away. I could not push past the attendant without making a scene, and a scene would bring police, questions, delays, everything a man carrying a secret package would like. So I did what Poirot would have done, and what, in my life, I have too rarely had the patience to do. I waited. As the thin-moustached man moved toward the back, I let the crowd carry me slowly in the same direction, never too directly, never too fast. The attendant remained near Vautrin, apparently satisfied I was behaving. Near the rear of the hall, where the stands backed onto a narrow service corridor, 2 policemen stood guarding a door. A small knot of staff hovered nearby, whispering. The thin-moustached man approached the door with the confidence of someone who expected it to open. One of the policemen stopped him. "Where are you going?" The thin-moustached man produced a badge, quickly, smoothly. The policeman glanced at it and stepped aside. The man disappeared through the door. I felt my mouth go dry. The badge again? Morel's badge, or the badge that pretended to be Morel. I turned, searching for Poirot in the hall, but he was nowhere in sight. Either he had already found his trail, or, more likely, he was somewhere I would not think to look. Then, from behind me, I heard a small voice very close to my ear. "Hastings," it said softly in English, "you have found the bookseller." Poirot stood beside me as if he had always been there, his expression serene, his eyes bright with that particular satisfaction he gets when the world behaves according to his suspicions. "You saw the exchange," he murmured. "Yes," I said quickly. He passed something to a man with a thin moustache and a briefcase. The man had a badge. He went through the service door. Poirot nodded. "And the stand," he said. "Librairie du Pont Neuf. A perfect hiding place. Who suspects a bookseller at a book fair?" He paused, then added very quietly, "And who suspects that the bookseller is not a bookseller at all?" I stared at him. "What do you mean?" Poirot's gaze went to the service door. "I mean," he said, "that the bookseller's purpose was never to sell books. It was to move things through the hall without anyone asking why." He turned to me. "Come," he said. "Now we do not wait." He moved toward the service door with brisk, tidy steps. Leduc's men at the far end were busy with other demands. The hall's attention was still fixed on the tragedy at the platform and the suspect in custody. No one was watching the back corridor except 2 policemen who had already been fooled by a badge. Poirot approached them with the effortless authority of a man who looks as if he belongs in any restricted space. "Messieurs," he said in French, "I must pass. It is urgent." One policeman hesitated. "Orders." Poirot lifted his hand, and I saw something flash, only for an instant, near his palm. Not a badge, a calling card. He had written something on it in neat ink. A name, an address, a reputation. The policeman glanced, frowned, and stepped aside. The other did the same. We slipped through. The service corridor behind the stands was narrower, darker, and smelled of cardboard and damp cloth. Crates were stacked along the walls. A single bulb burned overhead, making everything look yellow and tired. Ahead, we heard footsteps, quick, purposeful. Poirot's voice was barely above a whisper. "Hastings," he said. "You will be brave in a moment." I swallowed. Of course. Poirot's tone was almost kind. "I do not say this because you are not brave," he added. "I say it because you are brave in the wrong direction, this time Be brave in the direction I point. We rounded a stack of crates. At the far end of the corridor, near another door leading out to the alley, stood the thin mustached man with the briefcase. He had it open on a crate, his hands moving quickly inside. Beside him, half in shadow, stood another figure. Not Sokolov. A smaller man, neatly dressed, hat pulled low. He had a short, careful moustache, the moustache of the caretaker's description. The man looked up as we approached, and in the dim light I saw his eyes, hard, intelligent, entirely without panic. Poirot stopped. "Ah," Poirot said softly. "Monsieur Morel." The man smiled faintly. "Monsieur Poirot," he replied. "How unfortunate. You are very persistent." Poirot's eyes were bright. "Yes," he said. "It is one of my little faults." The thin mustached man snapped the briefcase shut at once, as if to protect its contents from the air. Morel's gaze flicked to it, then back to Poirot. "You are making a mistake," Morel said calmly. "This is an ugly day. A day for grieving, not for private games." Poirot's expression did not change, but his voice sharpened like a wire pulled tight. "A president is shot," Poirot said. "A young man is offered up. A Russian shouts to save him. A porter carries a case that smells of metal. A man bleeds in the rubbish. And you open gates and pass packages. That is not grieving, Monsieur Morel. That is arranging." Morel's smile thinned. "Inspector Leduc will not thank you for meddling." "Inspector Leduc," Poirot said, "will thank me when he is not being instructed what to believe." Morel's eyes hardened slightly. "You think you can prove something?" Poirot's voice was very quiet. "I think," he said, "that in that briefcase is the end of your tidy story." For the first time, Morel's calm cracked, not into fear, but into decision. His hand moved toward his coat. I stepped forward instinctively, but Poirot's hand shot out and caught my sleeve, exactly as before, stopping my heroics at the moment they would become stupidity. "No, Hastings," Poirot murmured. "Now." And in that instant, I understood what he meant by bravery in the direction he pointed. Because the thin mustached man, still clutching the briefcase, turned and bolted for the alley door. Poirot did not chase him. He looked at me. "Hastings," he said, "the briefcase." And I, for once, did not think. I ran. Some of you have asked if there's another way to support us right now. There is one we'd like to share, and it's something my wife and I created together. Alongside Nocturnal Tales, we wrote a children's book called Sherlock Paws and the Diamond of the Nile, available on Amazon. It's a classic detective story, reimagined for younger readers, with one important twist. Sherlock Holmes is a dog. In this story, Sherlock Paws and his loyal companion Dr. Spot set off on an adventure to Egypt, where a valuable diamond has vanished. With noses twitching and tails wagging, they rely on observation, logic, and attention to detail to uncover the truth. It's a mystery full of friendship, travel, and discovery, adventurous, but always warm and age-appropriate. The goal of the book is simple: to introduce children to detective thinking in a way that feels playful and engaging. Instead of noise and spectacle, the story rewards curiosity. Children are encouraged to notice clues, think things through, and enjoy how small details matter, just as they do in classic mysteries. If you have children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, or young readers in your family, this is a story we genuinely believe they might enjoy. And if you're looking for a way to support our work during this difficult period, purchasing the book helps us directly, while giving something tangible, thoughtful, and fun in return. As always, there's no obligation. We simply wanted to share something we made together with the same care we put into everything else. The link is in the description, and thank you truly for being here. Chapter 6. The Story They Wanted. I have chased men in mud, in desert heat, and once, memorably, through a Turkish bath where modesty died a rapid death. But there is something uniquely humiliating about chasing a man through a corridor lined with crates of books while, a few yards away, an entire nation is beginning to mourn. The thin-moustached man had the advantage of desperation. He darted for the alley door with the briefcase hugged to his ribs, shoulders hunched, head down. I had the advantage of longer legs and the sort of stubbornness the army used to reward. He burst into the alley. I followed. Paris at the back of a grand hall is not Paris of postcards. It is bins, damp stone, a smell of stale cabbage, and a tangle of side streets that look identical until you are lost. He turned left, skidded on wet cobbles, recovered, and ran as if the devil himself had promised him a pension. "Stop!" I shouted, an absurd thing to say to a running criminal, but old habits die hard. He glanced back, and I saw his eyes. Not the eyes of a fanatic, not even the eyes of a hired thug. They were the eyes of a clerk who has suddenly discovered that he is expected to die for other people's decisions. He swerved into a narrow passage between buildings. I followed, and in that instant my boot caught on something, an iron ring in the stones, half hidden by muck. I stumbled, cursed, and regained my balance only to see him at the end of the passage, already turning. And then he stopped dead. Two men stepped into his path as calmly as if they had been waiting for a tram. One was a policeman in plain clothes. The other was Hercule Poirot. The man with the briefcase froze, then tried stupidly to pivot back. Poirot lifted a hand. "No," he said softly, in French as neat as a legal signature. "You have run enough." The clerk's gaze flicked from Poirot to the policeman. His jaw worked. He seemed to make a decision, one last, bitter act of loyalty to his fear, and he thrust the briefcase outwards as though to throw it into the gutter. Poirot moved like a cat. He did not lunge. He simply stepped, placed his small body precisely in the right space, and caught the handle with 2 fingers. The briefcase did not fall. It did not fly. It merely changed owners. The clerk sagged. "Merci," Poirot said politely, as if accepting a hat. The policeman seized the man and hauled him back toward the hall. I arrived then, breathless, humiliated, and furious that Poirot had somehow got there before me, while appearing to take no exercise at all. "How?" I began. Poirot looked up at me, eyes bright. "I did not chase," he said. "I anticipated. It is less tiring." He gave the briefcase a small, disapproving glance. "This," he added, "is the heart of the arrangement." We returned through a side door into a small administrative room, clean, dull, lit by a single lamp. Inspector Leduc was already there, pale with anger, and Monsieur Vautrin stood beside him with the strained composure of a man trying to keep a dam intact with his hands. Sokolov, I learned, had been caught at the front entrance attempting to talk his way past a guard with a confidence that had, at last, run out of audience. Giraud, the shooter, sat in another room, guarded, silent now in the sour aftermath of his own purpose. And Morel, the man with the badge, had not been found. That, Poirot told me quietly, was because Morel had not needed to be found. Morel had needed only to leave. Leduc slammed his fist on the table when he saw the briefcase. "At last," he snapped. "Open it." Poirot did not. He set it down carefully as though it contained something that might stain the air. Instead, he turned to Vautrin. "Monsieur," Poirot said, "you wanted a simple story." Vautrin's mouth tightened. "We wanted order." "You wanted a headline," Poirot corrected. a lone extremist, a foreign agitator, a brave police response, a nation shocked but steady. Everyone goes home. Leduc's eyes were hard. And you think this briefcase destroys that? Poirot looked at him. I think it explains why they were so desperate to create it. He finally opened the briefcase. Inside were no stacks of money, no jewels, no melodramatic plot device. Only paper, neatly bundled files, letters, typed pages, and one smaller envelope sealed with a red wax mark. At the top of the bundle was a typed cover sheet. Dossier confidentiel à détruire. Vautrin made a small sound, almost a cough, as though the words had struck him physically. Leduc picked up the cover sheet, eyes scanning, and his face changed. "These are—" he began. Poirot lifted a hand. "These are not the President's speech notes," he said gently. "These are the President's problems." He looked at Vautrin. "And yours." Vautrin went very still. "You have no right," he began, but his voice lacked conviction now. Poirot's tone remained calm, almost pitying. "The President came to a book hall to speak of culture and civic virtue," Poirot said. "Someone decided that was the perfect theater in which to remove two things at once, the man and the papers that made him dangerous." Leduc stared at him. "Dangerous to whom?" Poirot did not answer at once. He let the silence do what it does best, force people to fill it. Vautrin's eyes flicked to the door. He was, I realized, calculating exits the way other men calculate commas. Poirot continued very quietly. "Giraud is not a professional assassin," he said. "He is the kind of man who can be persuaded that murder is philosophy. He was given an idea, a moment, and a weapon that arrived in a leather case through the service gate, because a weapon passed through the front entrance would have been searched." Leduc nodded grimly. "The porter, the documents for the platform." "And Sokolov," Poirot went on, "was there to manage the chaos, not to shoot, to ensure the shooter survived, because a dead man cannot repeat his instructions, and a living man can be made into a public explanation." Leduc's jaw clenched. "And the bookseller?" Poirot's eyes sharpened. "The bookseller was not selling books. He was moving access. A stand with no stock is perfect. Nobody lingers, nobody asks questions. Behind that stand a man can pass a badge, a key, an envelope, anything, without looking like he is doing more than commerce." I said, "But what about the wounded man, the one by the bins?" Poirot's gaze softened a fraction. "A courier," he said. "A disposable one. He carried the leather case to Sokolov earlier, then carried something else later. He believed he would exit quietly through the delivery gate before the noise. But when he was no longer useful, he was punished." Leduc's voice was low, and Morel did the punishing. Poirot nodded. "Morel is the hinge," he said. "The badge that opens doors, the moustache that makes a caretaker think ministry, the man who can walk through a police cordon because he looks like paperwork." Vautrin found his voice again, brittle. "This is fantasy," he snapped. "A president is shot in public. You cannot seriously claim it was a distraction for theft." Poirot turned his head slightly as if considering the word. "Not theft," he corrected. "Correction." He tapped the sealed envelope. This is what they wanted gone. And when it did not go, they tried to move it." Leduc reached for the envelope. Poirot placed a hand over it, lightly but with absolute authority. "Inspector," he said, "before you open this, decide which world you live in, the world where truth is allowed or the world where truth is managed." Leduc stared at Poirot for a long moment, then, slowly, pulled his hand back. He looked at Vautrin. "You will not touch anything," Leduc said. Vautrin's face tightened, but he did not protest. He was watching, calculating again. Poirot finally lifted the envelope and broke the seal with the edge of his thumb. He read the first page, eyes moving fast, and then, in a gesture I shall never forget, he placed it face down on the table, like a card turned in a game. "This," Poirot said quietly, "is why the President had to die today." Leduc's hand clenched. "What is it?" Poirot looked at him. "It is the President's signed instruction to begin an inquiry, formal, immediate, into a network of financial arrangements," he said, "in which certain men have profited by selling influence and laundering respectability through charitable cultural organizations." He glanced at the bundles. "And here are the names, the intermediaries, the payments, the letters that prove the doors were opened for money. It is not romance, Inspector. It is not ideology. It is the oldest motive in Europe. Men who do not wish to lose their comfortable lives." Vautrin's face had gone a peculiar grey. Leduc picked up another sheet and read, lips moving. Then he looked up as though the ceiling had lowered. "Cabinet names," he said hoarsely. "Committee names and... God help us." Poirot's voice was soft. "The bookseller's stand," he said, "was sponsored, not by a shop, by a front. A little cultural association that exists to move paper and people. The same association appears in these files." Vautrin burst out at last, losing the last of his polish. "This cannot go public," he hissed. "Do you understand what you would do? The country—" Poirot turned to him with a quiet, almost terrible calm. "Monsieur Vautrin," he said, "the country has already been done something. A president is dead." Vautrin's eyes flashed. "And if we tell the truth?" he demanded. "If we expose everything, you will create panic. You will weaken the state. You will hand ammunition to extremists." Poirot's expression did not change. "You speak as if the state is a vase," he said, "something fragile that must be hidden from reality. I disagree. The state is a machine. It must be cleaned, even if the water is dirty." Leduc's jaw worked. He looked older in that moment. Then a constable appeared at the door, breathless. "Inspector, we have a problem. The man called Morel. Someone saw him near the rear exit 10 minutes ago. He showed a badge. He's gone." Vautrin's eyes flickered, quick as a wink. Too quick. Poirot saw it. "Ah," Poirot murmured. "He is gone because someone allowed him to be gone." Leduc's head snapped toward Vautrin. Vautrin spread his hands. "You cannot accuse me—" Poirot cut in, still polite. "I do not accuse," he said. "I complete the picture." He turned to Leduc. "Inspector," Poirot said, "you will find Morel if you search the obvious places, stations, hotels, borders, but you will not find him quickly. He has friends with stamps." Leduc's voice was flat. "So we lose him." Poirot shook his head. "No," he said, "you do not lose him. You use him." He tapped the briefcase. "This briefcase is not only evidence," he said. "It is bait. Morel will want to know where it went, who holds it, whether it is safe." Leduc stared. "You think he'll come back?" Poirot's eyes were very bright. "He will not come back to the hall," he said. "But he will reach for the same thing he used today. A gate. A controlled exit." He looked at me. "And now, Hastings," he added, "you will be brave again, in the direction I point." I confess I did not like the sound of that. But before I could protest, a commotion erupted in the corridor outside. Voices raised, boots, the scrape of a struggle. Leduc sprang up, pistol drawn. The door flew open. 2 policemen dragged in a man, hat knocked sideways, coat torn, mustache still neat, despite it all. Morel. His eyes met Poirot's. and for the first time his composure truly broke. Not into fear, but into something like offended astonishment, as though he could not believe a small Belgian detective had interfered with a plan laid by important men. Poirot regarded him with mild interest. "You returned," Poirot said. Morel's lip curled. "I came for what is mine," he hissed. Poirot nodded, almost sympathetically. "Yes," he said. "That is always the mistake. You believed the story was yours to write." Morel's eyes flashed toward Vautrin. For a fraction of a second, the room understood everything without a word. Leduc saw it too. He turned on Vautrin like a man finally snapping a chain. "You," he said quietly. "You knew." Vautrin's face hardened into a mask. "I knew nothing," he said. "I managed a catastrophe." Poirot's voice was gentle, almost regretful. "No," he said. "You tried to manage the truth." Leduc's men hauled Morel down into a chair. He struggled once, then went still, eyes sharp again, calculating. "You have no idea what you are doing," Morel said softly. "You think you are saving France. You are only—" Poirot interrupted him, still calm. "I am only removing the mask," he said. "France will decide what she is beneath it." Morel stared at him, hatred and admiration tangled in the same look. Leduc slammed the envelope bundle into a drawer and locked it with a key that he put, deliberately, into his own pocket. Then he looked at Poirot. "You've done it," he said, rough with exhaustion. "But what now? The public will still be told the simple story." Poirot's expression softened, only slightly. "Perhaps," he said. "Perhaps the public will be given the story they want today." He glanced at the sealed hall beyond, where grief and panic were already being shaped into narrative. "But you, Inspector," Poirot added, "will not be given it. You will have the files, you will have Morel, you will have the clerk, you will have Sokolov, and you will have the one thing that makes arrangements collapse: paperwork." Leduc gave a short, humorless laugh. "In France," he said, "paperwork is what makes arrangements possible." Poirot smiled faintly. "Yes," he said, "which is why it is also what can destroy them. Later, much later, when we were finally allowed out into the Paris evening, I found myself walking beside Poirot along a boulevard that was suddenly quieter than it had any right to be. The city felt dazed, like a boxer after a blow. "They'll say it was a fanatic," I said bitterly. "They'll say the police caught him, and that will be that." Poirot looked up at the lights, at the moving faces, at the careless flow of life that always resumes. "They will say many things," he replied. "And the truth?" Poirot's voice was very calm. "The truth," he said, "is not what is said first. It is what remains when the arrangements are tired." He adjusted his tie, restoring symmetry to a world that had little of it. "Come, Hastings," he said. "We have done what we can. The rest is for France." And as we walked on, I understood, uncomfortably, that Poirot had not simply solved a murder. He had solved a story. Epilogue. The Real Crime. On Friday, June 6, 1932, the President of the French Republic, Paul Doumer, attended a literary event in Paris, the annual book fair of the Association des Écrivains Combattants, writers who were veterans of the Great War, held at the Hôtel Salomon de Rothschild, 11 Rue Berryer, Paris. In the middle of the reception, among bookstalls and polite conversation, Doumer was approached at close range by a Russian émigré, Pavel Gogolov. Using a Browning model 1910 semi-automatic pistol, Gogolov fired at the president and mortally wounded him. Doumer was taken to hospital but died in the early hours of 7th May, 1932. Gorgolov had entered the event earlier under a false name, Paul Bread, moving among the stands before acting. The attack shocked France, not least because it echoed the older fear of political violence returning at the very top of the state. The aftermath moved with brutal speed. Gorgolov was tried by the Cour d'Assises de la Seine, beginning 25th July 1932. Despite arguments about his mental state and his erratic behavior in court, the jury retained criminal responsibility and sentenced him to death. The conviction was upheld on appeal, and he was guillotined at La Santé prison on the 14th of September 1932. As for motive, Gorgolov presented himself as acting alone, mixing political grievance and personal ideology, claiming, among other things, anger at France's stance toward the Bolsheviks and its relationship with the Soviet Union. Historians have since examined how the case was quickly framed, in public discourse and policing, around the figure of a foreign extremist, and what that framing meant in interwar France. In short, a president was shot at a book fair in daylight in the heart of Paris, and the killer, Paul Gorgolov, became one of the Third Republic's most infamous political assassins, executed within 4 months.
Thank you for staying with us until the end of the story. If you enjoyed tonight's tale, do subscribe and share it with someone who appreciates a proper mystery. It helps more than most people think, and it remains one of the simplest ways to help this show continue. If you'd like more stories, you can find our full back catalogue on Patreon and Spotify, with extra new stories there as well. And if you'd like to support our work more directly, you can do so on Patreon. Tiers start at $2.99 with ad-free listening and extra stories, or for occasional support via Buy Me a Coffee or PayPal. All links are in the description. Thank you for listening. And now, be fair before you are certain, and do not let confidence outrun the facts. Good night.